Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 1st of November 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're delighted to be joined today by Alex Thompson with Eastern Approaches, and of course, Alex reporting from the depths of the Netherlands. Where do we start? Conspiracies.
Absolutely, conspiracies. The Guardian, hysterical about this. This is an article by Hugo Drochen, if that's how you pronounce his name. He's a political theorist and historian, political thought at Cambridge University. He's written a book, apparently, called Nietzsche's Great Politics. And the headline here is, We're Suckers for Conspiracy Theories, and it's a sign of deep social malaise. He says that last Thursday, Donald Trump authorized the release of almost 3,000 previously unseen documents relating to the JFK assassination in 1963. What did we learn? In truth, not much. But this was America's greatest conspiracy theorist sharing a moment with the event that has given rise to America's greatest conspiracy theories. Trump, remember, launched his political career with the so-called birther movement, which alleged Barack Obama was not born in Hawaii but in Kenya, and therefore was not eligible for office. And so it goes on. He highlights two studies, one by YouGov and one by the University of Cambridge Conspiracy and Democracy Project, which show that British people apparently are just as likely to believe in conspiracy theories as Americans. And he said that much has been made of the role of fake news and conspiracy theories have played in Brexit and the election of Trump. But the two surveys that he mentions help us better understand what's going on. Here's something to consider. He says, in our survey of 2015, 55% of respondents agreed with the statement the government is deliberately hiding the truth about how many immigrants really live in the country, and 52% agreed with the view officials of the European Union are gradually seeking to take over all lawmaking powers in this country. And of course, that influenced Brexit and so on. He said you can find conspiracy theorists across all walks of life, and yet certain stereotypes remain and refuse to be disproved. He says white, middle-aged men who have lower educational qualifications and are unemployed are still the most likely to be conspiracy theorists. Indeed, he says it is a sense of exclusion that characterizes conspiracy theorists. Those who reject the political system as a whole, who have a complete distrust of all political institutions, and those who don't vote, or if they do vote, they vote for extremes, in this case UKIP. And he says it's not conspiracy theorists that are the cause of disenchantment with democracy, but rather disenchantment with democracy that leads to conspiracy theorists and conspiracy theories. And he's saying that conspiracy theories are a symptom of a deeper malaise, therefore at the heart of society. Political and economic exclusion is what he's highlighting as the cause for all this. And because of that malaise, then sadly, we're going to see many more conspiracy theories. Alex, let's bring you straight in and ask what your thoughts are on that little diatribe.
Well, Mike, we had some fallacies being trotted out there and some straw men. So, and we have, I think, a professor of philosophy involved here, as you mentioned. So let's do a bit of etymological fallacy ourselves. His name is Drochen, which sounds Irish to me. The Irish word drochon would be made up of the elements droch, meaning bad or wicked, and on, meaning one who has a propensity to. So drochon means no good boyo.
Okay, so okay, well, I don't think we can do better than that. But I mean, what are your thoughts? He says here it's not conspiracy theories that are the cause of a disenchantment with democracy, but rather disenchantment with democracy that leads to conspiracy theories. Surely, what's going on there is that any disenchantment with democracy causes people to look closer at democracy, and perhaps they start to get to the truth. It's not a conspiracy theory. They're starting to highlight certain truths, which if people are just quite happy to sit in the background because democracy appears to be functioning all very well, thank you very much, they wouldn't otherwise be looking at. Is that not more likely to be the case?
Yes, discontent, as you suggest, Mike, is only the base of the pyramid. If we borrow the other side's analysis of pyramids of society, the base of our pyramid is the malcontents. Well, some would say misfits, and admittedly there are some, but malcontents and misfits who are discontented. That's basically the feeder into the alternative media and what is now called conspiracy theory world. Above that is layers of analysis and thought. And there's a bit of word games. One of UK Column News' favourite analyses is about word games and spinning of words. Word games going on here because it's allowable to the establishment, including the mainstream media, to say that there are some dischuffed people, unhappy. Maybe they feel they've got a raw deal. One gets an idea of a maladjusted guy, the European equivalent of a redneck, maybe out in his shack. But what can't be admitted is that UK Column News type people exist. I mean, we don't boast, but our core team is vastly more educated than any mainstream media team I know of, has served the nation in far better ways than I can think of any equivalent in mainstream journalism or indeed politics these days. And we're serious, educated, professional men. You can't admit of that in your diatribes. And someone has pointed out in the chat box that this is probably a copy and paste job by Drochen himself, because something to this effect came out in Demos earlier. So we can turn this analysis right back at the mainstream media and say, why are you parroting, or I think it's Nick Davies calls it churnalism in his book Flat Earth News. Why are you doing these jobs on behalf of think tanks aligned ultimately through parties and the Fabians back to the banks?
Absolutely.
Well, there is good news on the way, because a little bit later in today's news we'll be talking about parliamentary democracy for Parliament Week.
Oh,
good news coming.
Excellent, good stuff.
News.
Well, do we have a parliamentary democracy? Because apparently they're busy raping each other and drugging each other and all kinds of stuff going on, Brian.
It's hands on knees is apparently the thing that cannot be tolerated.
But I just wanted to highlight this. This is the London Evening Standard's front page. Date rape drug in Commons bar. So apparently there's been evidence that Rohypnol or some other similar drug has been used in the bar of the House of Commons. And I just thought it was ironic that it was George Osborne that was tweeting out. Of course, he is the editor of London Evening Standard, so it's fair enough. But I just thought it was ironic, bearing in mind all the allegations that were being made about him and his activities in the House of Commons bar, that he was so keen to push this one out. It does seem to me that this story is being pushed extremely hard by the mainstream media, by politicians, and this. I can only see this, as you've been describing it over the last couple of days, Brian, as an effort, a concerted effort to cover up the Heath investigation, which I think got way too close to the truth. We just were not comfortable with it.
I think that's it. Let's follow it through. So we got date rape drug in Commons bar. Then we've got this fascinating article here from the Mail that an anonymous group of researchers connected with Westminster have produced a list which has got the names of about 40 MPs, and it's listing misdemeanours of a sexual nature. The Mail's blanked out some of the names, but telling people that if they go and have a look for this in America, they will find the full list. So part of the headline here is men won't be able to ask women out. MP named in dirty dossier warns over climate of fear, but insists he's not a sleazebag, as another senior Tory says he's mystified at being included in the libelous document. And what is this? Just what is going on here? Because there's been some misdemeanours committed, but down at the bottom you can find Amber Rudd's name, and what has she done that's apparently wrong? Well, she's been going out with another MP, so her husband had died, unfortunately, and then sometime later Amber Rudd is going out with another MP, but her name is on this list. It's anonymous, but it's being published. And here we've got more Tory MPs are named in the dirty dossier of alleged indiscretions as new sex claims emerge, and the entire document is published in America. So this is everything from, well, the use of male prostitutes to people putting their hands on other people's knees, Mike. I think this is all part of the cover-up of Ted Heath, and the Tory party is absolutely desperate to move away from where the real evidence is. So if we just try and capture what's going on here in a simple way, let's bring in the hard evidence, which of course was Tim Fortescue, Tory whip, on BBC camera, saying that MPs came to the whips with problems. It could be small boys. We fixed it for them so they do as we asked.
And that was Ted Heath's whip.
One of Ted Heath's whips.
Yes.
Yeah. So here's the thing that admitted to BBC camera that MPs were abusing boys, but the Tory party covered it up so they could blackmail them. This is the elephant in the room. The evidence for the child abuse is all there. And this is Lord Armstrong. He refused to give details of an MP who'd been involved in the abuse of children. So here's the cover up. And we can go on, can't we? Because we can bring in here Sir Nicholas Fairbairn, so no messing around there, very close to Margaret Thatcher. Melanie Shaw I'm going to bring in because, of course, Melanie's one of many child abuse survivors, saying that members of Westminster were involved in the abuse circles. We've got Met policeman John Wedger, also said politicians were involved in child abuse and helping to cover it up. Of course, nobody assisted this man. Mike Penning, Brandon Lewis, the policing ministers didn't do anything. Prime Minister herself didn't do anything. And then, of course, it blows up because the Heath investigation is carried out by Mike Veal from Wiltshire Police. He's stuck with his guns. Evidence brought to the table. Public sees some of it, but they don't see the critical things. I'm going to mention Ted Heath's hands here. This is part of the critical information. And now what have we got? Well, suddenly we've got a propaganda media campaign of irrelevant sexual knee-touching innuendo. And there can only be one objective here, Mike. This is for this. They are hoping is going to swamp out the reality of Parliament containing child abusers and the Conservative Party covering up for those people.
Looking back at previous child abuse inquiries, Operation Orr springs to mind, which was the list produced by the FBI that was handed to the Metropolitan Police, and there were allegedly some high-level politicians on that list of people that were accessing child pornography. And if you remember, that operation was subverted by the police deliberately raiding innocent people's homes in order to discredit the whole thing. And that's exactly what seems to be going on here.
Yeah, but this has got a high level of sophistication, Mike. And the other thing which I keep saying to people, do not forget that in the heart of the British government, the Cabinet Office, we have the Behavioural Insights team. It's still there. What is it doing? Changing people's beliefs and behaviours by applied psychology. Would you use that to help cover up child abuse in the Conservative Party? My guess is you would.
Okay, House of Lords International Relations Committee this morning. Just before we talk about that, a few days ago, it was in Hungary. The Foreign Minister of Hungary made a statement saying that he wanted the European Union to speed up integration of the Western Balkans and also for NATO to include those countries. He said speeding up the accession process is a guarantee of security. An unstable and tension-riddled Western Balkans is a serious risk for all Europe. And I would just ask, if that's true, then is it not because of NATO's intervention there in the 90s? Well, we can get Alex's take on this in a second. But the House of Lords International Relations Committee meeting this morning to discuss NATO expansion in the Balkans. Now, it was taking place just as we were coming on air, at least the second half of it was. So we haven't got too much of the detail of what they actually spoke about, what the evidence was, but the questions that they were looking at were such as, other than supporting the membership prospects of Western Balkans countries, how is NATO engaging in the region? Other questions included the engagement of NATO in the region has raised unresolved tensions between Russia and NATO. How might Russia respond to further expansion? What steps might be taken to overcome the objections from Greece to the name Macedonia? Are there ways in which Macedonian membership might progress without this issue being resolved, and so on? So, this is what they were looking at, Alex. And I mean, these are questions that you have touched on this program and on Insight over the last few months. But I mean, what are your thoughts on NATO expansion and this call from Hungary to speed up the accession process of these countries into NATO?
Well, as I said before regarding Poland, that government, although it's anti-Brussels in a very welcome way, is always playing a double game. I wouldn't say the same of Hungary, at least not to anything like the same extent. So when Péter Szijjártó, the Hungarian foreign minister, calls for NATO involvement in the Balkans and in expansion there, he's really only echoing his Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who said a few months ago that there must be EU expansion into Serbia. But that's the key phrase here. By saying Western Balkans, which is the fragmented former Yugoslavia, the Hungarians are saying support Serbia as an Eastern Orthodox, pro-Russian, pro-civilization country, but they're doing it under wraps because Serbia has still had its name blackened by the Clinton-led 1990s, as you mentioned. And people can find out more about that in the Insight Balkans on the members section. But there's a difference here between the Hungarians saying get Serbia in, which is to provide a further buffer to keep the migrant pressure out. And if you look up the clips, you will see that these are hardcore anarchists from Arab countries now battering on the Hungarian fence. That's what the Hungarians want, to remove one country further from them. There's a mismatch between that and the EU and NATO, led from Brussels, saying we must have these countries on board because that is to do with finance and encirclement of Serbia. So the very opposite aim. The US has seen the accession of Macedonia and Montenegro, which has to be ratified in all NATO members' parliaments, has seen that rammed through Congress and the White House. And the aim there, of course, is to denude Serbia of its allies and to prevent any return to the former unity of southern Slavic countries that there was under Yugoslavia. So there's different aims being pursued here by different actors. And as usual, you should peel back the layers of the vocabulary and see what the actual interests are. In short, the Hungarians have got noble intents here. But they are, as usual, as with a lot of Eastern European countries, they are mistaken. They still think NATO is the good side of European integration. They're getting the message about the EU, but they still think NATO is a good idea, not realizing that both of these are Anglo-American Swiss banking projects, EU and NATO. Neither of them has anything to do with a genuine wish of post-war or contemporary European continental member states.
Okay, thanks for that, Alex. Now, let's talk about international aid and our favourite international aid minister, Priti Patel, because, well, apparently the UK is a firm champion of the rules-based international system, Brian. And so because we're a firm champion of the rules-based international system, we've decided we're going to change the rules to suit ourselves. This is with regard to international aid. Now, the excuse that's being given for this is the situation over the hurricanes over U.S. direction. Sorry, I lost my thread here just a little bit. And if you remember, there was a lot of criticism of the British government that they weren't giving support to the British Virgin Islands and so on, rapid enough support. And so they're using that as an excuse to change the rules on international aid. They say that they have secured important progress on the Development Assistance Committee meetings in Paris to change the international aid rules and ensure they remain relevant for the modern world. And by that, they mean relevant for Britain. British leadership has today also delivered an important set of wider reforms to international aid rules, including more than doubling the percentage of contributions to UN peacekeeping missions that count as aid from 7% to 15%, and confirmation that 85% of UK core funding to the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank will count as aid. Therefore, these changes mean that we've confirmed over £100 million of aid spending this year can be counted as aid and contribute to the 0.7% budget, which the UK claims is the only country on the planet that really meets that undertaking. So Priti Patel said UK leadership has secured significant and important progress in changing the international aid rules. As we committed to in our manifesto. As a result of our influence, we have made huge progress in ensuring official development assistance can be used when vulnerable nations are struck by crises or other natural disasters. I don't suppose, Alex, that it matters whether the crises are natural or not. It means that Britain can, at a drop of a hat, pump temporary money into places that it suits them in order to pursue their soft power agenda.
Well, that is really, Mike, the belly of the British beast, and it goes back centuries. This idea of creating crises, whether psychologically, socially, or even using scientific means. It's a very dark alley to go down, but there's a long history of elite British families of thinkers and conspirators, really, writing and researching this and promoting it with their money. How science or the social fears can be used to wreck an area, so that British soft power, as it's nowadays called, it wasn't called that in the past, so that that can move in. The Brits are the acknowledged experts in this, so the whole of Europe and the US and the deep state actors in that part of the world look to the Brits for the acknowledged lead. Often, I'm sorry to say that even the Church of England is used in these plans, and its interests overlap very closely with the so-called crisis hit areas. So there's a question about that, and particularly, as you mentioned there, British and City of London funding in the Asian Investment Bank, or I forget the exact term, but if I'm not mistaken, Mike, that is the bank which has been set up as the funding wing of One Belt, One Road, the People's Republic of China's initiative. So there I see, at a very deep level, the city realizing that dollar-based economy is bust, leaving the US to sink, and getting on board with the new Eurasian plans.
Well, I wasn't sure whether that was the reason for it or whether it was just typical British wanting to get in very early in order to try to screw it up from the inside. This is typical British foreign policy.
It is, unfortunately, and you and I know this. This is how people talk in the city and in government circles as well. They don't use quite such direct language as "let's get in there and screw it up," but that is very much the tenor of conversation at mid-officer level in both banks and government offices.
Absolutely. So, Alex, who is the nation's enemy? Then this is quite surprising. It's from the Conservative Woman. Is this an online magazine, or is it both print and online? Do you know?
As far as I know, Conservative Woman is online only, and it is basically the last bastion of small c conservative thought by former members of the capital C Conservative Party. And by no means all of them women, but the main writers and for those for whom the site was set up are the old-fashioned real conservative women, not the Blue Rinse Brigade that Brian rightly snipes at from time to time. And Laura Perrins is their main woman and appears to great effect on the mainstream media as a commentator as well. But here she writes, she's basically the brand carrier for Conservative Woman online. And she says that it was Hitchens, Peter Hitchens, shortly after 2000, who, as a former Marxist himself, knew all too well the tricks, and he could see the Marxist takeover of the Tory party as Theresa May got into her stride. Remember wearing her leopard print shoes and her slogans about the nasty party. And Perrins says there, "I'm sorry to admit that Peter, with his doom merchandise, was right all along. And actually, the Conservative Party is now the nest of Marxists that's doing more damage to the country than the Labour Party, because at least people know what they're getting with Corbyn." It's quite a stunner to see her come out in all these positions, but she quite rightly identifies that the big state ideas, the big society of Cameron, which harks back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt's ideas for America in the 30s, that's the real Trojan horse involved here. And the straw that broke the camel's back for Laura Perrins was the move to a continental style "we own your body" move in the name of organ donation, but as she points out, it has only very loose connections with real medical needs for organs. It's more or less an ideological way of saying your body belongs to us by default. So there is nothing conservative or British about the Conservative Party anymore. They're not unionist, and they don't live up to any part of their name. And Perrins has realised, along with Hitchens a long time before her, that it is what has to go.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of enemies, and we've mentioned Orban already this morning, but Viktor Orban suggesting that the new communist enemy is Brussels.
Yes, so he again, from his position, and this is the 61st anniversary speech for the October 1956 anti-Stalin uprising, anti-Khrushchev uprising, in Budapest. He has actually said, well, we fought the communists, and they intended to reshape man into a blob with no culture or nation or thought, called Homo Sovieticus, which was a famous phrase which came up in Khrushchev's time in 56. And it was the Georgians and Hungarians, as the most thinking and Christian nations in the Eastern Bloc, that said no to the point of bleeding in front of tanks. And having their leaders carted off to the Gulag for it in 1956, both of them. But they did turn the tide within the Eastern Bloc. And in this speech, Orban has said, well, we're actually facing a new enemy now. They're trying to mold us into Homo Brusellicus. They have no esteem for us. They don't know their own history. They're becoming irrelevant. The EU and the continent of Europe as a whole is becoming tangential to the world economy and world philosophical processes. Nobody takes the EU seriously or its individual countries anymore. We're a soft touch. And, he's really declared war. And when the Hungarians do this, they know that they're setting themselves up for half a century to a century's hard slog. In all the previous times they have resisted the encroachment, it's been from the south and east, and they've been Europe's outpost. But this time they seem to be the bastion looking north and west to the follies coming their way from the other side.
Well, let's come back to the UK then, and the police and reframing. And, well, as you're saying, mission accomplished here. Now, this is stories that we've seen coming out of the last couple of weeks over the behaviour of the police. So just run us through this stuff.
Well, we have in the left, in the South Yorkshire policing area, which includes Rotherham of all places, we have this policewoman at superintendent rank saying, "Join me in this anti-hate speech week." Very Orwellian, and there's my response below, pointing out that she's a peace officer, and whatever her rank is, below chief constable, you are actually a constable at law, and you've sworn your oath to uphold the common law, and you're a peace officer. You're not there to police people's speech. And then in the top centre, we have Leicestershire Police, because there was a coordination. The Home Office, as it's done since the days of Roy Jenkins half a century ago, the Home Office sends these national directives as if we had a national political police force. And Leicestershire Police likewise obeyed during this hate speech week. And my response to that is that that they shouldn't be involved in matters of mens rea or motive. That's for the juries, not even for judges. Humberside Police, that's also in the east of England. Notice the concentration of the East Midlands and that part of Britain more generally seems to be where some of the worst policing and corruption is at the moment. It has been for a long time. Humberside Police getting in the dodgems there while other officers film. And on the right, we have a lady who seems to be a professional feminist, if you look her up. And she's got her way into a cushy consultancy number with the civil service. And in a very common purpose style, she's had them put thought bubbles up on the wall in a consultation exercise saying, what is an inclusive civil service? And it's a civil service in which everyone is represented other than the traditional civil servant, not to put too fine a point on it. And I've said to this lady, actually, civil servants are not free in common purpose style to imagine their duties or imagine the world in which they will serve. They are there to serve us now in the real world with set protocols and statutes and, above all, our constitution in place. So I've called her subversive. But there's a lot of this going on.
Well, and indeed more.
Yes, here we have... It comes to a point now for the foreign viewers in the first week of November every year, on the closest Sunday to the 11th of November, we have church services at 11 o'clock and civic ceremonies to commemorate the fallen of both world wars. And then also we fall silent at the 11th hour on the 11th of November as well. That's been revived in the last couple of decades. And this is called Poppy Day collectively, particularly the Sunday parades. And the policing, again, at national level, which is unlawful by the Home Office, has basically, I'm not sure of the individual directives given, but the effect of it widely being reported is that police are saying we don't have the manpower to police these parades. And of course, there's supposedly a terrorist threat to them as well. Well, in places like Luton, it's a real terrorist threat. I have to be frank about that. But here they are. They haven't got the money for that. But even homosexual Kilon Robertson, who's gone up in my estimation recently, certainly since he left the rebel media, he is himself as a gay man saying, we are now prioritising gay parties over our fallen heroes. This is not being done on behalf of homosexuals. Homosexual patriots are as disgusted by this as anyone else. And on the right, you see police there painting their nails on behalf of what? What are they up to? I think Brian would have some thoughts about what this is all about.
Well, you're already there, Alex, which is that these people have been reframed. This is the effect of applied psychology. It might have come in a very strong course, or it could have been fed in over a number of sessions. But these are people who are now acting away from their true personality. They're adopting an imposed view of the world. I first warned about this with Common Purpose, the pernicious political charity that was clearly using NLP, neurolinguistics, to change the way people saw society, politics, communities, even their own families. And now we've got this driven into every aspect of the civil service, NHS and the police. And we're just about to move on to the NHS here.
Well, indeed, the Independent's headline is NHS is worse than healthcare in Ireland, Spain and Slovenia in new global ranking. Alex, tell us about this, but we just would like to mention Towards a Million Change Agents, the article on the UK Column website, if people haven't read that yet, and to understand what we mean by NHS reframing, you probably need to read that article. But Alex.
Well, as the husband both of a medic and of a lady who's required some very specialist healthcare together with her late father, excellently provided by the Dutch health system, I feel I can talk about this with some authority, with very high esteem for our NHS doctors, because this study came from The Lancet, which not for nothing is still a British magazine. British Health, well, we invented modern healthcare, and it's not that we don't have very high standards and very conscientious and able doctors. We do, even the British trained among them, not just the foreigners who are being imported into the NHS. The trouble is that since the world really left the communist era, the overt communist era in 1990, and moved to the globalist idiom, we have trodden water, while the rest of Western Europe, with its systems which are basically based on people largely contributing through their own health insurance and the government only topping up or setting some rules, they have leapfrogged us. Not just the Scandinavians and the Germanic continentals, but the French, the Spaniards, the Irish, nations which can't afford some of the expensive treatments that the NHS still can, thank God. Even places like Greece. And of course, in the wider scheme, Russia, China, Brazil, these have all got decent healthcare systems in parts now as they get into middle class status. We've trodden water, particularly in the problems of oncology, where we lag far behind other European countries in how early we use diagnostic mechanisms. It overlaps as well with Dr. Graham Downing's repeated warnings about the pharmaceutical companies and how they regard people in many cases simply as cash cows. And the general attitude permeating the managerial class increasingly in the NHS, that you shouldn't moan, and if you're a poor elderly person with multiple conditions, your time is up and you shouldn't expect to be treated. Whereas the rest of Europe has in the last generation gone ahead of us by taking the attitude, well, we might have less money than the Brits, but we are actually going to pull all the stops out to save our own parents and grandparents.
Look, just briefly on this, if you don't mind, Alex, the question is, where will NHS Scotland cut £500 million from? The headline in the Telegraph is that Scotland's NHS planning £445 million of cuts amid spiralling waiting lists. Part of the problem here, Alex, is it not, is that money is not being used for healthcare anymore. The NHS is being used as this massive data collection organisation, and so much money is going into superfluous activities which have got nothing to do with healthcare.
Yes, it's a front for pharmaceuticals, for research, for mind control, experimentation, and the whole lot. And it's Audit Scotland, the Scottish Government's devolved auditing body, which has pointed out that these cuts are going to have to be made. And that's why I put on the bottom of the slide there, people can freeze it and go back to it, the fact that at 38 minutes timestamp in the third of the videos, which David Scott, I'm sure, will be talking about when he next comes on, probably on Friday, about the Fresh Start Foundation. At that point, he mentions that Audit Scotland has a raison d'etre not to lay its finger on the problem, because they are a government-funded body and their salaries depend upon not asking the right questions and following things up properly. So they're only going to come up with number crunching. They're never going to ask the questions of why and what's gone wrong with the NHS as we do. Yeah.
Well, we're going to continue to ask questions of what's gone wrong with the NHS. So bring in this headline, which is a mere £1 billion has gone missing through fraud in NHS, in the NHS in England, despicable fraud. What's fascinating me is that the NHS has been transformed. We can look and we can see that individuals, this lady is one of them, leading the transformation of the NHS. Sentence after sentence of newspeak in this lady's CV, transformation, moving to the future, change. It goes on and on and on, but we see the NHS changing, but clearly it's not for the better. Mike's mentioned the UK column Towards a Million Change Agent article. Now, this is based on real documentation inside the NHS, where one of the senior ladies was calling for 1 million change agents in order to take the NHS where it needed to be, apparently. We refuse to believe that there's fraud in the NHS, because here's NHS England saying that they've had a sustainable improvement team in place. So I can't believe that that improvement would have included fraud. Or if you don't believe that, we've got a Horizons team working with the transformation team, and their mission is basically to positively impact people's lives by transforming leaders within the NHS in order to transform the NHS into a fully transformed organisation. So can't believe that there would be fraud. NHS belongs to us all, engaging people in decisions about services. Now we're into the messing around with people's heads. An NHS Change Day you covered in some detail some months ago, Mike, with NHS leaders, senior managers playing games with straw and little cotton tape and stuff. So this is really very dangerous stuff. And one of the key ladies here, Jackie, she's moved on to a specialist organisation which is helping drive change in other places. And you can see that she's boasting she worked for 35 years in the NHS. So I'm going to suggest that if the NHS is collapsing at the moment, that is intentional, and it's been done by imposing disruptors, that's their terminology, not mine, into the machinery of the NHS itself.
Well, Tech UK was holding its conference yesterday, supercharging the digital economy. And our very own digital minister, Matt Hancock, was there. And he was saying that Britain published its digital strategy in March this year, and that set out how the government intends to make the UK the best place to establish and grow a digital business and the safest place for citizens to be online. He was pleased to tell them at this event that only 6 months since its launch, that the government is making great progress. They've released an industrial strategy green paper as well, published earlier in the year, and it identified AI as a major opportunity for the UK with real potential to boost our future economy. We already have some of the best minds in the world working on AI, and many areas of the UK economy in health, education, finance, to name just three, have embraced innovation through AI. The challenge now for government is to build a strong partnership with industry and academia to cement our position as the best place in the world to base and develop this new technology. And so in March, we launched an independent review, Growing the Artificial Intelligence Industry was what it was called. It was led by Jerome Pesenti and Dame Wendy Hall, and the final report will be published was published just a couple of weeks ago, and sets out what the government needs to do to support the enormous potential of AI. So that's all very interesting, but where does it go? Well, perhaps we get a clue as to where they're taking this, because Harriet Baldwin has announced that science and technology is at the core of defence, as she has launched a new strategy in Birmingham yesterday. It's a science and technology strategy to counter evolving threats and adapt to rapidly changing technologies, apparently. They are setting out specific research areas and capability priorities like autonomy, cyber and sensor technology, and the strategy will encourage defence to be even more responsive to emerging opportunities and threats. So an £800 million innovation fund to go into this area, the Defence and Security Accelerator is what it's called. So they are certainly going to be partnering with corporations and universities to develop this technology. The Guardian today saying that artificial intelligence risks a GM-style public backlash. This is according to some experts that they've been speaking to. They're saying that the emerging field of artificial intelligence risks provoking a public backlash as it increasingly falls into private hands, threatens people's jobs, and operates without effective oversight or regulatory control. And this is according to some leading experts that have been speaking to The Guardian. They say that the benefits of AI might be lost to GM-style backlash, that it could cause a brain drain to the private sector, which is harming universities, that it could mean that expertise and wealth are being concentrated in a handful of firms, and it could lead to a huge diversity problem. But Alex, how much are you concerned about this continuing drive by government to sort of merge government functions with private interests to drive forward this type of technology? Again, we have The Guardian not really asking any questions, merely sort of telling us that we've got warnings from experts about a public backlash against this, not really questioning why there might be a public backlash. And where do you see this going in terms of defence?
Oh, to take the last part first, I think we're well on the way to RoboCop or Robo-Soldier. The Pentagon, as usual, has gone gung-ho ahead with that and has made little secret of it. Other nations are attempting to do the same, at least in terms of pilots and increasingly tank men using their thoughts to control the equipment they're using, the firepower. It may go further than that as well, bionic bodies, seems to be. But the wider point of AI is simply the latest iteration of globalism being driven again by hedge fund managers and the banks, wanting to see people make the right decisions that are cheapest and that allow people to be manipulated into consumerism the most. AI and big data is simply a way of saying, know people's habits and sit on them and also control their behavior better in a political repression sense. But the wider problem here is naivety. Whether you're in central government or local government, there is this strong tendency among those who fancy themselves as geeks and techno consumers in the younger ranks to think that anything you do with tech or getting closer to tech or people who are in tech is a good thing. But tech is not a blob. Tech is a group of people with financial motives, with ideologies, and with agendas. You need to look at the individual people that you're doing deals with and providing the public's data to, and remind yourself that they have motives which may cut across your duties as a public servant.
Yeah. Okay, what's next?
Well, let's put an advert for The Matrix, which was the local talks that are taking place in Totnes. The first one was last night. That was having a look at the Treasury. It was also having a look at birth certificates. Well attended, I believe about 50 people there. And as I said a few days ago, we're delighted younger people attending because they're getting very interested in what's going on in the world around them. So don't watch UK Column News thinking, yes, but what can I do? These sorts of meetings, getting people together, very effective at changing people's knowledge and perceptions in local community. Well, let's bring in the Royal Navy briefly, because, of course, local Conservative MP Gary Streeter and his colleague Johnny Mercer have told the UK column absolutely nothing wrong in the military at the moment. Here we've got the latest report, though. Royal Navy ships cannibalised for parts. This is the sort of spin that the Ministry of Defence is putting out. I've put Michael Fallon's picture on this because, of course, he's ultimately responsible. Less than 0.5% of parts we use come from swapping components, and we only do this when it's absolutely necessary to get ships out of port and back onto operations more quickly. This is desperation when you do this, Mike. It has been done for many years. It is not a good thing because it means you have not got the spare parts to run the equipment or the ships or the aircraft, whatever it is. And here's the dross. We continue to make improvements to how we manage this long-established practice. So the practice is rotten, it's dangerous, it puts people under pressure, but they're making improvements to that rotten system, so nothing to worry about. Meanwhile, the fleet can barely get ships to sea. Manning, never mind spare parts. This is the reality from retired naval officers. Warships returning from operations were being stripped of parts within hours of mooring so they could be fitted to other ships preparing to deploy. Ships on lower readiness and training tasks were being left without parts. Engineers are required to manage this, and there's no respite for them. You get alongside, and just as everyone else is standing down, they have to prepare to remove and hand over equipment. It's definitely a contributory factor to the lack of morale in the engineering section. So there we are, that's the reality. But of course, local MPs here, Gary Streeter, Johnny Mercer, as with many other Tory MPs, simply trying to pull the wool over the public and denying there's any problems with the Ministry of Defence at the moment.
Alex, we're just about out of time, so very, very quickly on this one. This is from Jane's 360. Dutch officer commands German Panzer Battalion for the first time. This is more evidence of EU military unification in action.
Yes, this is a publication related to what people will know as Jane's Defence Review. 360 is the look at the prospects ahead. And here, the Dutch Defence Ministry, under a new minister, after the disgraceful resignation forced of the old one, Mrs. Hennis, they're going straight ahead and saying, making no bones about it, saying, yes, we wish to provide our armoured infantry straight to the Germans under the control of the Erste Panzerbataillon, which is straight out treason, particularly given what that very Panzerbataillon or its predecessors did in the Netherlands only 60, 70 years ago. But there we are. It's going ahead, and where is this going to be deployed? This mixed Germanic Panzer Battalion. It's not going to be pacifying the rioters of Luxembourg, is it? It's going to be heading slightly further east.
You would have thought so.
Okay, we'll leave it there on that very serious note of EU military unification. Thank you very much, all of our viewers and listeners that have joined us today. If you like what UK Column is doing, the news that we're putting out, the facts and the information and the analysis, we need your financial support. So please take out a subscription, and of course you can always make us a donation. But without your financial support, we cannot do what we do. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.